The sun hung low over the Montana horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson as dust swirled across the empty road. Martha Henderson stood on her porch, wiping flour from her hands onto her worn apron, watching the lone figure approach on horseback. She hadn't seen another soul in 3 weeks, not since the supply wagon had come through with barely enough provisions to last her another month. The ranch stretched out behind her like a monument to broken dreams, with fences that needed mending, a barn door hanging by a single hinge, and fields that had gone too long without proper care. The rider drew closer, and Martha could make out the silhouette of a man wearing a weather-beaten hat and carrying the unmistakable posture of someone who had spent more years in the saddle than on solid ground. Her heart quickened, not with fear exactly, but with the sharp awareness of her vulnerability. 6 months had passed since Thomas died, crushed beneath a fallen beam during the winter storms, and every day since had been a battle against the elements, against loneliness, and against the slowly crumbling infrastructure of the life they had built together. The cowboy stopped his horse at the edge of her property, removing his hat to reveal sun-darkened skin and eyes that held the kind of weariness that comes from seeing too much of the world's harsh edges. He said, his voice rough as gravel but not unkind. Name's Jacob Reese. I've been riding for 2 days straight, and my horse is about done in. I saw your place from the ridge and was hoping I might water him and perhaps rest for a spell. I can pay. Martha studied him carefully, weighing her options. Trust didn't come easy out here, where the nearest neighbor was 15 miles away and the law even farther. But something in his bearing suggested honesty, and she had learned over the years to read people quickly. I don't need your money, she said finally. But I could use a hand with something, if you're willing to work for your supper and a place in the barn. Jacob's eyes brightened slightly, the first hint of relief crossing his weathered face. Yes, I'd be grateful for that. He dismounted smoothly despite obvious fatigue and led his horse toward the water trough. As he walked, Martha noticed the way he moved, with the careful efficiency of someone who understood the value of conserved energy and deliberate action. She pointed toward the barn. That door has been hanging crooked for a month now. I've tried twice to fix it myself, but I can't get the leverage I need. If you can get it back on properly, we'll call it even. It was a test as much as a task. She wanted to see how he worked, whether he was the kind of man who did things halfway or whether he took pride in completing a job properly. Jacob nodded and set to examining the door, running his hands along the damaged hinge with the practiced assessment of someone who had fixed countless such problems before. This'll need more than just rehanging, he said after a moment. The wood split here, and the frame is warped. With your permission, I could reinforce it properly, but it'll take me most of tomorrow to do it right. Martha felt something shift inside her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't just relief at having help, though that was certainly part of it. It was the simple acknowledgement that someone saw the work that needed doing and was willing to commit to doing it thoroughly. You'd stay that long? She asked, trying to keep the hope from her voice. If you'll have me? Truth is, I've been drifting for a while now, and honest work sounds better than another cold camp on the trail. Jacob replaced his hat and met her eyes directly, and in that moment, Martha made a decision that would change everything. She was starving for this, for another person's presence, for capable hands that could shore up the failing pieces of her world, for the sound of a voice that wasn't just her own echo in the empty house. There's stew on the stove, she said, turning toward the door. Come inside when you're ready, and we'll discuss what else needs doing around here. As she walked back into the house, she didn't see the small smile that crossed Jacob's face, or the way his shoulders straightened just slightly, as if he too had found something he'd been searching for without knowing it. Dawn broke cold and clear across the ranch, and Martha woke to the sound of hammer strikes echoing from the barn. She dressed quickly, surprised that Jacob had already started working, and made her way outside with a pot of coffee and 2 tin cups. The cowboy had removed his shirt in the early morning chill, his muscles working beneath tan skin as he drove nails with precise, measured strikes. Sawdust clung to his arms, and she could see he had already made significant progress on the barn door. You're up early, she called out, approaching with the coffee. Jacob paused mid-swing and turned, reaching for his shirt with a hint of embarrassment that Martha found oddly endearing. Habit. Light comes, and I'm awake whether I want to be or not. He accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping his calloused hands around the warm cup. I hope the hammering didn't disturb you. Martha shook her head, watching steam rise from her own cup into the crisp air. I've been waking before dawn since I was a girl. It's what you do out here. She studied the work he had done, noting the careful measurements he had made, the way he had reinforced the frame exactly as he said he would. You know what you're doing. My father was a carpenter before he headed west, Jacob explained, running his hand along the newly installed beam. He taught me that anything worth doing is worth doing so it'll last. This door should serve you well for another 20 years now, maybe more. He took a long drink of coffee, and Martha noticed the way his expression softened slightly, the hard edges of constant vigilance melting just a fraction. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Martha heard herself saying words she hadn't planned. The fences need work too. And the roof of the house has a leak I can't reach. The well pump is getting stubborn. The list goes on. She paused, vulnerability creeping into her voice. I'm starving for this, if I'm being honest. For help. For another set of hands. I can feed you well, and the barn is warm enough with the extra blankets I have. If you wanted to stay on for a week or two, there's more than enough work to justify it. Jacob set down his coffee cup carefully, his expression thoughtful. I appreciate the offer, but I should be clear about something. I'm not a charity case, and I won't take advantage of your situation. If I stay, I work. And if you're going to feed me and house me, then I'll do every job on this ranch that needs doing, and I'll do it right. There was something fierce in his voice, a pride that Martha recognized because she carried the same thing in herself. I wouldn't have it any other way, she replied firmly. I'm not looking for favors, Mr. Reese. I'm looking for a working arrangement that benefits both of us. You need a place to rest and regular meals. I need someone who can handle the heavy work that's beyond my strength alone. It's a fair trade, nothing more. But even as she said it, Martha knew it wasn't entirely true. There was something more in the air between them, something unspoken but present nonetheless. It was the recognition that they were both survivors, both people who had been shaped by hardship and loss into something harder than the world around them. Jacob seemed to sense it too, because he nodded slowly and extended his hand. Then we have an agreement, Mrs. Henderson. I'll stay 2 weeks and tackle every job on your list. After that, we'll see where things stand. His handshake was firm and honest, and Martha felt the calluses on his palm, evidence of a lifetime of hard work that matched her own work-roughened hands. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that Martha hadn't realized she was desperate to experience again. Jacob proved to be as good as his word, working from dawn until dusk with a dedication that bordered on relentless. He repaired the fences, replacing rotted posts and tightening wire until the boundaries of the ranch stood strong again. He climbed onto the roof and patched the leak, then surveyed the rest of the structure and fixed 2 more weak spots Martha hadn't even known existed. He broke down the well pump, cleaned every component, and reassembled it until it worked smoother than it had in years. But more than the physical labor, it was the presence of another person that fed something starving inside Martha's soul. They ate breakfast together each morning, dinner each evening, and the conversations began to extend beyond simple discussions of work. Jacob told her about growing up in Missouri, about the war that had taken his father and brother, about the years he had spent drifting westward looking for something he could never quite name. Martha found herself sharing stories about Thomas, about their early years building the ranch from nothing, about the dreams they had held for a place that was entirely their own. On the 5th evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Jacob said something that made Martha's breath catch. You've built something remarkable here, Mrs. Henderson. This place has good bones. With the right care, it could be one of the finest ranches in the territory. He paused, his eyes on the horizon. Your husband must have been a hell of a man to create this with you. He was, Martha said softly. But he's gone now, and the ranch needs more than memories to survive. She turned to look at Jacob directly. I'm starving for this, Mr. Reese. For the chance to see this place become what it was meant to be. And I think maybe you're starving for the same thing, even if you won't admit it. Jacob met her eyes, and in the fading light, Martha saw something shift in his expression. Maybe I am, he admitted quietly. Maybe I am. The sky turned the color of old bruises on the 8th day, and Jacob looked up from the fence he was mending with the instinct of someone who had learned to read weather as a matter of survival. Storm's coming, he called to Martha, who was working in the garden. A bad one, from the look of it. We should get everything secured. They worked together with urgent efficiency, moving the livestock into the barn, securing loose equipment, and battening down anything that could become a projectile in high winds. Martha had lived through countless storms, but there was something ominous about the greenish tint to the clouds, the way the air felt heavy and electric. By the time they finished, the first drops were falling, fat and cold, and the wind was beginning to howl. Get inside, Jacob shouted over the rising gale. I'm going to make sure the barn is secure. But before he could turn away, Martha grabbed his arm. No, she said firmly. The barn can wait. You'll be blown clear to the next county if you try to cross the yard now. She pulled him toward the house, and they stumbled through the door just as the full force of the storm hit. The windows rattled in their frames, and rain hammered against the walls like fists demanding entry. Martha lit lamps while Jacob secured the shutters, and then they stood in the main room, breathing hard from exertion and adrenaline. Water dripped from their clothes, forming small pools on the wooden floor, and Martha became acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the way the lamplight cast shadows across Jacob's face. "I'll get some dry clothes," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "Thomas's things are still in the trunk. They should fit you well enough." She disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a shirt and pants, handing them to Jacob before retreating to give him privacy. When she emerged in her own dry clothes, he was sitting by the stove, and she put on water for tea. The storm raged outside, but inside the house, a different kind of intensity was building. They sat across from each other, cups warming their hands, and the usual comfortable silence between them felt charged with something new. Finally, Jacob spoke, his voice low and serious. "Mrs. Henderson, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." Martha's heart began to beat faster, but she nodded. "Go ahead." 2 weeks ago, I was a man with no direction and no purpose beyond the next town and the next odd job, Jacob said, his eyes fixed on his cup. "I've been running from something for 5 years now, though I couldn't tell you exactly what. Maybe it was the memory of my family. Maybe it was the feeling that I didn't deserve to settle down after surviving when they didn't. But since I came here, since I started working on this ranch, something has shifted inside me." He looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "You said you were starving for help, for another set of hands to keep this place going. But Mrs. Henderson, Martha, I need you to understand that I'm starving too. I'm starving for purpose, for a place to belong, for work that matters beyond just survival. And I think, if I'm reading this situation right, you might be starving for more than just labor." The wind screamed outside, but Martha heard every word with perfect clarity. Her throat felt tight, and she set down her cup with trembling hands. "What exactly are you saying, Mr. Reese?" "I'm saying that I'd like to stay beyond the 2 weeks we agreed on. I'm saying that this ranch needs a full-time hand, someone who can help you not just maintain it but grow it into what it should be. And I'm saying that I think we work well together, that there's something here worth exploring." He paused, vulnerability showing through his usually stoic expression. "But I won't presume. If you want me to move on after the storm passes, I'll respect that. I just needed you to know what I was thinking." Martha stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at the tempest. Her mind raced with conflicting emotions. Thomas had only been gone 6 months. What would people say if she took on a permanent hired hand so soon, especially one she clearly felt something for? But as she watched lightning split the sky, she realized that the opinions of distant neighbors mattered far less than the truth of her own heart. "I'm starving for this," she said quietly, her back still to Jacob. "For companionship. For partnership. For the feeling that I'm not facing every challenge alone." She turned to face him. "But I need you to understand something too. This ranch is my life's work. Thomas and I built it from nothing, and I won't compromise its future or my independence for anything or anyone. If you stay, it has to be as equals, as partners in keeping this place alive." Jacob stood, crossing the room until he stood before her. "I wouldn't want it any other way. I'm not looking to take over or take charge. I'm looking to work beside someone who has the same fire I do, the same refusal to give up even when everything seems impossible." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. "I see that fire in you, Martha. It's what drew me to stay in the first place." The storm outside reached its peak, the house shaking with the force of wind and rain, but inside, Martha felt something settle into place. She squeezed Jacob's hand, feeling the strength in his grip and the honesty in his touch. "Then stay," she said. "Stay and help me fight for this place. Stay and help me prove that it can still thrive." Jacob's response was cut off by a tremendous crash from outside, the sound of wood splintering and something heavy hitting the ground. They both rushed to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass, and saw that one of the large oak trees near the barn had been uprooted, falling across the corner of the structure. "The animals," Martha gasped, already moving toward the door. "Wait," Jacob said, grabbing his coat. "It's too dangerous for both of us. Let me go check the damage." But Martha was already pulling on her own coat, her jaw set with determination. "This is my ranch, Jacob. My responsibility. We go together or not at all." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded with what might have been respect or admiration or both. Together then. They plunged out into the storm, fighting against wind that tried to knock them off their feet, rain that blinded them, and mud that sucked at their boots. The journey to the barn, normally a 30-second walk, took several minutes of hard struggle, but they made it. The damage to the barn was significant but not catastrophic. The fallen oak had crashed through the corner of the roof, leaving a gaping hole that exposed the interior to the elements, but the main structure remained sound. The animals were frightened but unharmed, huddled together in the opposite corner away from the destruction. Martha and Jacob spent the next 3 hours in the storm, working by lamplight and sheer determination to cover the hole with tarps and secure them against the wind. By the time they stumbled back to the house, both were soaked to the bone, exhausted, and covered in mud and debris. Martha's hands were bleeding from wrestling with the rough canvas, and Jacob had a nasty bruise forming on his shoulder where a piece of falling timber had struck him. They stood in the main room, dripping and shivering, and then Martha started to laugh. It began as a small chuckle but grew into full, gasping laughter that she couldn't control. Jacob stared at her for a moment, then joined in, and soon they were both laughing with the slightly hysterical edge of people who had pushed through fear and exhaustion into something like triumph. "We must look like drowned rats," Martha managed to say between laughs. "Drowned rats who saved a barn full of livestock," Jacob replied, grinning. "I'd say that's something to be proud of." He moved toward the stove to build up the fire, and Martha went to get more dry clothes and blankets. When she returned, the room was beginning to warm, and steam was rising from their wet garments. They changed again, this time too tired to care much about modesty, and then sat by the fire with blankets wrapped around their shoulders. The storm was beginning to ease, the worst of its fury spent, and in the relative quiet, Martha felt the adrenaline drain from her body, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and something else, something warm and alive that had nothing to do with the fire. "You didn't have to come out there with me," Jacob said softly. "You could have stayed safe inside." Martha shook her head. "That's not who I am. I don't ask others to take risks for my property that I won't take myself. Thomas understood that about me from the beginning. It's important that you understand it too." Jacob reached over and gently took her injured hand, examining the cuts and scrapes with a concerned frown. "You're going to need to clean these properly," he said, standing to fetch water and cloth. He returned and began carefully cleaning her wounds, his touch surprisingly gentle for such rough hands. Martha watched his face as he worked, noting the concentration in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he had to press harder to remove embedded dirt. "Thank you," she said quietly when he finished. "For staying. For helping. For not trying to talk me out of doing what needed to be done." Jacob looked up at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Martha, I'm beginning to understand that trying to talk you out of anything would be a waste of time, and I mean that as the highest compliment." He set aside the cloth and water, but he didn't let go of her hand. "I need you to know something. When I said I was starving for purpose, I wasn't telling you the whole truth. I'm starving for this, for you, for the way you face every challenge head-on without flinching. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and somewhere over the past 8 days, I've started to fall in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and impossible to take back. Martha's heart hammered in her chest, and she knew she stood at a crossroads. She could retreat into the safety of propriety and grief, or she could step forward into the terrifying possibility of something new. "Jacob," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's too soon. Thomas has only been gone 6 months." "I know," Jacob replied. "And I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight or even this month. I'm just being honest about what I feel. You deserve that honesty." He started to pull his hand away, but Martha held on, stopping him. "Wait," she said. "Let me finish. It's too soon, and I don't know what the future holds, and I'm scared of what this means. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel something too." She took a shaky breath. "I'm starving for this too, Jacob. For the way you see me as capable instead of fragile. For the way you work beside me instead of trying to take over. For the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I don't have to face the rest of my life alone." Tears welled in her eyes, surprising her. "But I love Thomas. I loved him deeply, and I feel like I'm betraying him by even having these feelings so soon after his death." Jacob moved closer, and with his free hand, he gently wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Love isn't betrayal, Martha. Thomas would want you to be happy, to have help, to have companionship. From what you've told me about him, he sounds like he was a good man who would want the ranch and you to thrive, not wither away in isolation." "How can you be so sure?" Martha asked, her voice breaking slightly. Jacob's expression grew tender. Because if our situations were reversed, if I had built this life with you and then died, I would want someone good to come along and help you keep going. I would want you to find happiness again, even if it meant my memory wasn't the only thing in your heart. The honesty of his words broke something open inside Martha, and she found herself leaning forward, resting her forehead against Jacob's shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her carefully, as if she were something precious that might shatter, and they sat like that for a long time, the fire crackling beside them and the storm finally passing outside. Stay, Martha whispered against his shirt. Not just for 2 weeks or 2 months. Stay and help me build something lasting here. Stay and let me figure out what these feelings mean. Stay and keep asking for more work, more challenges, more life from this place. Jacob's arms tightened around her. I'll stay as long as you'll have me. I'll work until my hands are raw and my back is breaking, and I'll do it gladly because this, right here, this is what I've been searching for all along. 3 months passed like water flowing over smooth stones, each day adding its own shape to the evolving contours of life on the ranch. Jacob proved true to his word, throwing himself into every aspect of the work with a dedication that amazed even Martha. Together they rebuilt the damaged section of the barn, this time with reinforced beams that would withstand future storms. They expanded the fencing to include new grazing land. They purchased additional livestock with the money Martha had been hoarding for emergencies, confident now that they could manage a larger operation. But more than the physical changes to the ranch, it was the transformation between them that marked the true progress. They had not rushed into anything romantic, both understanding that some things required careful cultivation like crops in difficult soil. Instead, they built a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. They made decisions together about the ranch's direction. They challenged each other's ideas and learned to compromise when their visions differed. Martha found herself laughing again, something she hadn't realized she had stopped doing until the sound became familiar once more. Jacob had a dry wit that caught her off guard, and his stories from years of drifting contained both hardship and moments of unexpected humor. She shared her own memories more freely now, talking about Thomas without the sharp edge of fresh grief, remembering the good times with fondness rather than pain. The neighbors began to notice the improvements to the Henderson ranch, and eventually, one of them rode over to investigate. Frank Morrison, who owned the adjacent property, approached while Martha and Jacob were working on a new fence line. "Heard you took on some help," he said, his tone carefully neutral but his eyes sharp with curiosity. Martha straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead. "This is Jacob Reese. He's my partner in running this place." She used the word deliberately, and Frank's eyebrows rose slightly. "Partner, is it? That's quite a commitment." There was a hint of judgment in his voice, but Martha met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, it is. This ranch was dying before Jacob arrived. Now it's thriving. I make no apologies for that." Frank studied Jacob for a long moment, and Jacob bore the scrutiny with quiet dignity, neither defensive nor aggressive. Finally, Frank nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Can't argue with results, and your property is looking better than I've seen it in years." He paused, then added with grudging respect, "Thomas would be pleased to see the place being cared for properly." After Frank left, Jacob turned to Martha with a slight smile. "That went better than I expected." Martha returned the smile, but her eyes were serious. "People will talk, Jacob. They'll make assumptions about us, about our arrangement. Some will be kind, others won't. Does that bother you?" "Not particularly," Jacob replied, returning to his work on the fence. "I stopped caring what strangers thought of me years ago. The only person whose opinion matters to me is standing right here." He glanced at her. "Does it bother you?" Martha considered the question honestly. 6 months ago, the answer would have been different. But something had changed in her, hardened by grief and then tempered by the work of rebuilding. "No," she said finally. "What bothers me is waste. Wasted potential, wasted opportunity, wasted life. Everything else is just noise." As spring turned toward summer, the ranch began to show profits for the first time since Thomas's death. They sold cattle at good prices, their reputation for quality stock spreading through the territory. Martha opened an account at the bank in her and Jacob's names, a formal recognition of their partnership that felt both practical and significant. The banker, Mr. Peterson, had raised his eyebrows but processed the paperwork without comment, and Martha had felt a surge of satisfaction at taking another step toward defining their arrangement on their own terms. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Martha said, "I'm starving for this, still. For the work, for the progress, for the feeling that we're building something that will last beyond us. She paused, gathering her courage. But I'm also starving for more, Jacob. I'm starving for the right to call you mine without qualification. I'm starving for a future that includes both the ranch and us. Jacob set down the piece of tack he had been mending and turned to face her fully. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Martha nodded, her heart racing but her voice steady. I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you. I'm saying that Thomas will always have a place in my heart, but there's room there for you too. I'm saying that I want you to stay not just as a partner in the ranch but as my husband, if you'll have me. The last light of the sun caught the moisture in Jacob's eyes as he reached for her hand. Martha Henderson, I have been yours since the moment you trusted me enough to let me stay. I would be honored to be your husband, to build this life with you officially and completely. He pulled her close, and when he kissed her, it was with the certainty of someone who had finally found home after years of wandering. They were married quietly a month later by the circuit judge who came through the territory, with Frank Morrison and his wife standing as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, practical and honest like everything else about their relationship, and when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Martha felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. The ranch continued to grow under their combined management. They hired seasonal help when needed, built a new storage barn, and even began to experiment with new breeds of cattle that showed promise for the harsh Montana climate. Jacob taught Martha some of the carpentry skills his father had taught him, and she taught him the intricacies of animal husbandry she had learned through hard experience. But more than business partners or even spouses, they became true companions, two people who had both known loss and hardship and had chosen to face the future together with clear eyes and determined hearts. They argued sometimes about the best approach to a problem, but they learned to navigate disagreements with respect and compromise. They worked from dawn to dusk most days, but they also learned to rest, to enjoy the fruits of their labor, to sit on the porch in the evenings and simply be together. One night, a year after Jacob had first ridden up to the ranch, Martha lay beside him in the darkness of their bedroom and said, "Do you remember what I said that first day? That I was starving for help." Jacob's arm tightened around her. "I remember everything from that day. I was starving," Martha continued. "But I didn't fully understand what I was hungry for. I thought it was just about the physical work, about having someone to help with the labor. But it was so much more than that." She turned to face him in the darkness. "I was starving for purpose beyond mere survival. I was starving for partnership and understanding. I was starving for the chance to build something meaningful with someone who saw me as an equal." Jacob kissed her forehead gently. "And when I did it, when I helped you, you kept asking for more. More work, more partnership, more commitment." Martha smiled against his chest. "Because you gave me what I truly needed. Not just labor, but respect. Not just help, but collaboration. Not just presence, but love." She paused. "I'll probably keep asking for more, you know. It's who I am." "Good," Jacob replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Because I'll keep giving it. That's who I am." They lay together in comfortable silence, listening to the wind move through the Montana grasslands, the sound of their horses shifting in the barn, the familiar creaks of the house they had made into a home together. The ranch stretched out around them in the darkness, every fence and building a testament to their combined efforts, every acre a promise of the future they were creating. It was a hard life, demanding and unforgiving, but it was theirs, built on honesty and mutual respect and a love that had grown from shared purpose into something deep and lasting. Martha drifted towards sleep, still starving for this, for every tomorrow that would bring new challenges and new triumphs, for every moment of working beside the man who had wandered into her life when she needed him most and had chosen to stay when staying was hard. And Jacob held her, grateful beyond words for the woman who had seen past his dusty exterior to the partner he could be, who had challenged him to be better, to work harder, to build something meaningful. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs. But inside the house, two people who had both known what it meant to be starving had found nourishment in work, in partnership, and in love. And that was enough. That was everything.